Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Please welcome Chris Jones. Good to see you, Delegate.
Woody, my pleasure.
You're still chair of the Appropriations Committee, I take it?
Yes, sir.
And this is going to be another interesting budget year for you.
Seems like almost all of them are interesting budget years, but yes, this will be a very interesting budget year.
Now, last year when I interviewed you towards the end of that session, there was a concern about all the money that was coming into the state coffers because we didn't know what impact that would have in terms of the budget for this year. Right. Tell us how things have panned out so far.
Well, I'd hoped we would have had a special session last year, but we did not, to deal with the tax issue. And that's in relationship to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed in Washington, the previous year. So not having a special session to deal with that, of course, fast forward to the governor introducing his budget in December. And so he, in fact, has introduced a budget that includes those revenues it's about $1.2 billion over 2 years. And so what that means is that we've got that additional money in the budget to consider from the governor's perspective. And what we are doing at the appropriations levels is we're going to take all that money out, all those spending items out of the budget, and we're going to go back to what I call the base budget and how we would traditionally do it. So what we will be doing is taking Chapter 2, which is the approved budget from last year. We'll take any savings that we have and any reforecast, which is a process that we use with GACR, the Governor's Advisory Commission on Revenue estimates, and that's about $900 million. And so when you take out the mandatory spending increases for Medicaid and other issues, and what we call high priority, there's about $300 million to consider. So as opposed to him doing 1.4, 1.5 billion, we've got about $300 million to consider. And in an off year, that's a lot of money. That is more than what we normally would have to consider and contemplate. And so I've given direction to the subcommittee chairman and to the committee to start building the budget based on those numbers.
Now, is the governor required to submit a best case and also a worst case?
No, he submits his case, and then we will make our case. So we always jokingly say the governor proposes and then the legislature disposes. So the process is going to go through, it's not going to be normal like you would traditionally think it, because he has spent a lot of resources that we're not going to have available to us, I would believe, at the end of the day. His approach was to put $200 and some million towards the earned income tax credit of about...
What is that for those?
That's for the low-income individuals, lower income, who when they file their taxes, it's a federal program, and currently we have a certain allowance. It's not refundable, meaning if you only pay X, you get X back. He wanted to make it totally refundable. It was about a $200 million cost. So the Republicans have a tax bill in the House and in the Senate, and the windfall of revenue that we're receiving is really from those who can no longer itemize at the state level if they choose to do the standard deduction at the federal. Because the federal government actually almost doubled the deductions from $12,300 to $24,000 for a couple. So many will opt to do the standard approach at the federal level, and they're prohibited from the way we conform to doing that at the state level. And that's the largest share of those who will be adversely impacted. So we have a proposal to allow you to choose standard at the federal level and then itemization at the state level.
So now, as I understand it, the Speaker has decided to congregate all of those tax matters in the Rules Committee. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we have until, all those bills had to be put in last Wednesday. So waiting to get all those bills put in. We will start building our budget, and then my guess is he will send them to the Finance Committee, certain of those bills to the Finance Committee, sometime within the next week to 10 days. So crossover is not until the 5th of February. Our budget has to come out on the 3rd of February. So we've got about 2 weeks to contemplate those measures.
So talk to us a little bit more about what happened at the federal level, why there is a windfall, and also, before I forget, I believe there was an underestimation of costs relating to the current Medicaid program.
Yes, okay, a couple things. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act had many provisions in it that were permanent and many more that were not permanent. The business provisions are permanent. And what they did, I think they took the tax rate down to 20 or 21% for corporate, those who file as a corporation. For those who have like LLCs and pass-through income, there is a calculation to allow you to take 20% of what your federal tax would have been and reduce it to try to offset to make you closer to the corporate rate. Because many more are pass-through as opposed to corporations. So they were the permanent features of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Others were, they limited the amount, whether they're temporary, what you can do on your SALT deduction, which is state and local taxes, $10,000. So you saw, like, your states like New York, California were all upset because they have a lot high property values there. So their taxpayers would have been capped at that $10,000. So that had an impact, limiting interest deductions on your mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of changes that happened at the federal level that have an impact at the state level. So there's no lack of ideas that have been brought to us. So the speakers are, going to accumulate all those bills within the Rules Committee, and then we will begin that process. Not me, but the Finance Committee, Chairman Ware and Delegate Hugo, I think, is carrying the bills in the House. We'll start that process in probably about a week and a half.
And there was an underestimation of costs relating to the current Medicaid program, as I understand it.
That's correct. We raised an issue, at least I did, about a year and a half ago when the forecast came out. I thought it was off because it was so low. It was like 2.5%, 2.8%, and the average increase had been around 6%. And so when they came to true up, it was a much higher number than they had given us, but it wasn't. It was where I thought it was going to be because of the trends in Medicaid. This has nothing to do with Medicaid expansion.
Right.
This was just the existing Medicaid program. And a couple of the items were issues with the CMS, Centers for Medicaid and, DOJ, excuse me, with Catawba Hospital and a couple of our facilities. They were saying we could not bill at a certain rate for quote-unquote services we were providing. So we've contested that. So that was probably close to 100 million of that number.
What was the total number? It was
about 438 million.
And then there's a cost the state's going to have to eat as a result of the termination of a contract for IT with Northrop Grumman.
Finally, after several years of going back and forth, we were disentangling ourselves from the Northrop Grumman contract. That was we set up VITA, in the Virginia Information Technology agency. That was in the Warner administration, believe it or not, which has been many, many years ago. That was bringing everything under one roof and a better way to do business. What we found over time was we needed to move out of that arrangement, and so I guess we have completed the divorce, if you want to call it that, and we settled, I think it was $40 million. I don't have the exact number in my brain. But we have asked, as a committee, for a breakdown of the true cost to disentangle, and then what the savings will be for the Commonwealth, vis-a-vis our agencies and enhanced security and our technology capabilities.
So how are revenues coming in so far?
December was down on the non-withholding. We kind of anticipated that. Withholding still strong. Sales tax was strong in November. We will get the December numbers. What's today, the 16th? We'll get our December sales tax number. Filings are due on the 20th. So in about a week, we'll see how we did in December. Now, Macy's and a couple of the big retailers said they were down, but we always look at, you have to take December and January together, the revenues that come in, to make one. So you do Black Friday, so you get a big bump sometimes in December, and then when we get to January numbers, we'll have a better idea of where we are. But overall, we're in better shape than most. Sequestration being off the table really helped us a couple of years ago, and the Tax Cut and Jobs Act has stimulated our economy. But we still have to be very conservative in how we approach any new revenues that we receive, and that's why whatever deal we do on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act response, we should take, I think, those dollars and put into the Revenue Reserve Fund that was established last year to kind of hedge against any downturn in the economy.
What about the State Retirement Fund? How is it doing?
Doing well. We've got, it's still, I guess it's been 7 years since we did the real change that we had. We're working with then Speaker Howell and Senator John Watkins, and it was set in place to get to 100% of the rates by VRS that would be set. We did that a year early, so now we're paying 100% of our rates. Our real concern, Woody, is as we look to the future, 2/3 of the earnings, 2/3 of what we spend annually comes from earnings to pay for benefits for our retirees. And as we have gone from 8% return to 7.5% return now to 7%, as we look at what is the real return moving forward, it could be 6.75%, which is 25 basis points drop. So, and that would cause us to probably have to come up with another couple $100 million to fund that reduction, because that means you're going to have less returns,
right,
more requirement of deposits by us as a Commonwealth. So I think we're in really good shape. Now, the one concern that I do have is our OPEB, other post-employment benefits. We provide right now for our retirees a health insurance credit of $4 per year after you retire, after I think 20 years of service. So that's been $4. So you might, if you serve for 30 years, you'll have $120 per month credit. The funded status of that is about 10%, 8 to 10%. We got about an $800 and some million liability. So part of what we're going to do in our budget this year is either create a surcharge for agencies and hopefully put some additional money in to buy down that liability, because that's something that the bond rating agencies have pointed out. It's an issue that we need to address, and now is the best time to start addressing it.
We've migrated from a defined benefit plan. Are there still state employees on defined benefit plans?
Oh, yes. We still have Plan 1 employees, which was the original plan. We had Plan 2, which took your final average compensation had to be over 5 years, not 3, and your number had to be 90, not 80, to retire age and then years of service. So, and then we went to a hybrid plan about 5 years ago, and that has been something that saved the state some money. Our real challenge has been the number of individuals in the hybrid plan doing additional contributions to their defined contribution plan. So we need to sit down and have a real conversation about, should we incent them more, and should the state put a little bit more down to encourage them to put more into their own retirement. So when they look to retire, you've got that right mix of how much is coming from Social Security, how much is coming from your state retirement plan, to be able to have the quality of life that you would expect as a retiree.
I noticed in the governor's remarks last Wednesday, he talked about doing away with some accelerated taxes for small businesses.
We did the accelerated sales tax probably 5 or 6 years ago when we got into a real downturn, meaning you paid what was due early. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you normally pay on the 20th of the month, and that is for last month's collections. And so what we did, we said you pay early based on your anticipated sales, and then you true up at the end of the year. Right now, I think if you have a certain level of sales, you still do it the old way, but those above a certain level have to go in and do the accelerated sales tax. He was going to buy that down and allow, I forget how many more vendors, more stores, to be able to do it the old way. I still would like to do that. I'm not sure we can afford to do it this session. I've recommended that we look at almost like a bi-monthly deposit. And some of your big, Home Depot, Lowe's, and the like, they have so much technology they can deposit almost weekly if we ask them to. So we need to have that discussion and try to get that taken care of in the next year or two.
Now, where are we in terms of internet sales tax revenue as a result of that Supreme Court decision?
That was a Wayfair decision. That was decided last June. And I think what South Dakota had done is that anybody above $100,000, you have to remit sales tax to the state. Went to the Supreme Court. It was the old nexus rule. If you didn't have a physical presence in that state, then Congress said you could not tax. Well, about 5 years ago in the McDowell administration, we actually did a deal with Amazon for them to start collecting sales tax in certain cases. And then we addressed the fulfillment piece of Amazon maybe 2 years ago. And what we have seen in talking to the Secretary of Finance and Department of Tax is that we think a lot are already voluntarily remitting that to us. Initially, they said it's going to be a $250 million influx. I think it's more probably in the $125 million range. And so my recommendation would be that we don't look to spend it yet. We need to know exactly how much it's going to be before we align spending with resources until we know how much it's going to be. That is in the governor's introduced budget, and we've got legislation to deal with that. And once the Finance Committee addresses that, then we'll know what we can do as far as an Appropriations Committee to program the money in our budget.
Now, what impact do you anticipate in terms of the new headquarters of Amazon in Northern Virginia?
Well, it's going to be significant. It was I think they announced in October of 2017, I believe, that they were looking to have a second headquarters. I was very much involved with that, chairing that commission, the MEI, the Major Employment and Investment Commission, for about 9 months of that time frame. And it was going to be 50,000 jobs in a substantial investment in the several billions of dollars, $3 or $4 billion at that point in time. Then they decided at the very end to split it, do 25,000 in one location, 25,000 in another location, and I think that was beneficial for Virginia. I had concerns of us, being able to absorb 50,000 jobs. So, I was surprised that I wasn't surprised that we got in the final grouping, and I wasn't surprised that we got part of the project because of our strength of governance, a right-to-work state, strength of our higher ed system. What I was surprised with was how little it cost us to get them to come here. It's about $22,000 a job for the 25,000 jobs. It is a post-performance agreement, meaning the jobs have to be certified. It started out as $100,000 per job, and it's now $150,000 per job. So it's that's 50% higher than what it originally had anticipated. So we're net positive on resources to the Commonwealth from day one, pretty much, and ours is the post-performance. The good news is it's caused us to focus with regards to our institutions of higher learning. And there are several bills that are out there that will be coming to a special subcommittee I've established that I'll chair that deal with the incentives piece, which I'm carrying that bill, and then what we call the job creation piece, which Delegate Nick Rush is carrying as well. And so we'll have a process we're going to work through, and we're going to look to incentivize those institutions of higher learning. And Virginia Tech played a critical role in Amazon coming to Virginia. They love the higher ed piece that we put out there.
That reminds me, there's a bill relating to the creation of an independent agency to audit, if you will, Medicaid expenses, the current program, and I believe Senator McDougal is carrying that bill. I don't think it got out of committee. It would create an independent agency to make sure that the numbers that it won't happen again. Same mistakes won't be made again.
Well, right after I shared my concern with the numbers over 1.5 years ago because I thought they missed the mark by a mile. My word, not anyone else's. They said they had worked with their actuary, and I said, well, their actuary wasn't very good. Now, in their defense, we were starting up a new program, the CCC Plus, the Commonwealth Care Coordinated Network, which is dual eligible Medicaid and Medicare. But they should have anticipated better than they did. So I've talked with the Director of Medicaid, I've talked with the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, and the Secretary of Finance, Aubrey Lane. And so we're already working to that end. They have to come back to us in the budget language last year we had where they've got to give, they have to come back to us and we'll set targets for Medicaid. But any and all transparency is very important. I do know that JLARC has oversight and they come back with spending in a lot of areas like this VRS, etc. So I'm not sure we need an independent agency. I think we have a network, we have in place what we need. It needs to be tweaked. and there needs to be more accountability at the end of the day.
In terms of economic development, there was a bill, I believe, that passed last year that was sponsored by Will Moorfield and LaSharice Aird to deal with the problems in their district in Southside Virginia. Do you know how that's going?
I think it's too early. It's only been, 7 months since it's gone into effect. I know that they're working with VEDP, which is the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and Stephen Murray, who is the CEO. And there's no doubt we've got challenges in certain parts of our Commonwealth, and we have to approach things differently in those areas. So we've got to provide an incentive for companies to go and want to locate where they might normally want to locate. They've got a tough environment to be able to create jobs because of the unemployment, out-migration of people, and then just sometimes the where they're located geographically. You've got Tennessee with no income tax, and then you go across it, the border into Virginia, and we have income tax. So I'm hopeful. I'm curious to see how it's going to unfold. I'm hopeful it's going to have its desired impact.
Because I think the unemployment rate statewide now is less than 3%.
Right.
Now, I believe. But obviously in pockets it's much larger.
It's 4 and 5 times that, which is unacceptable.
So how are things going in your neck of the woods, so to speak, Chesapeake area?
Chesapeake and Suffolk, I think, we've been fortunate. We've turned around our economy a little bit. I think I stated when I was here last year, I've got real concerns about the Hampton Roads economy. I've been extremely pleased at how the region has come together. The local governments, having been a former mayor, I recall the days of, well, is it on my side of the line or your side of the line? Who gets this, who gets that? I think Go Virginia has helped with that and how we are really trying to encourage participation amongst localities. If I look at HR TAC, which is the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, yesterday Smart Scale came out. We're going to get $200 million towards the HRBT.
Now that's the criteria used to determine where transportation funding goes.
That's correct. And that was Chris Stolley's bill back, I think, the first year that the McAuliffe administration came in in 2014, I believe. And so it's nice to kind of look back and see things that you had hoped would go a certain way when you planned them that are going that way. The high-rise bridge, we have a big crane out there. They're putting pylons in the ground. We're going to be adding, more lanes there. The intersection of 264-64, where you go from Norfolk and Chesapeake to Virginia Beach, that's well on its way. The second segment of 64 in the peninsula should be finished in the next 6 months. Open up another 5 or 6 miles of Interstate 64. The port's well underway on its expansion. We got approval from the Army Corps of Engineers to go deeper, 55 feet wider, 1,400 feet. We should have a dredge out in the by this time next year. Well on our way to getting the permits for that first phase on this side of the HRBT on the Suffolk and Chesapeake side. So a lot of good things are happening, and they are well on their way. I think they finished first phase of densification at NIT, Norfolk International Terminal. And 6 of the biggest cranes, or 4 of the biggest cranes, largest cranes in the world were delivered last week to VIG, Virginia International Gateway. So a lot of good things are happening. We still have a lot of challenges, and we've got to be ever vigilant. And we got Reinvent Hampton Roads, which is a nonprofit that's kind of our arm, coordinate all things Go Virginia. So we've got to work harder because we're a cul-de-sac. We've got to get away from our dependence on the military and the federal government. I see good partnerships happening with Old Dominion and Newport News, the Digital Ship Initiative. And then lastly, great news in the last couple of weeks, the Navy says they're going to build 2 carriers at the same time, so that's going to help Newport News with their predictability. They've got to save, I think, $3 or $4 billion over the 2 carriers. I think that's the number. They're going to build 2 Virginia-class subs a year, not 1. And the Columbia class sub, which is a higher replacement, is going to be, we get more of that work because we can shape and bend the steel with our foundry. Foundry just underway, we're going to replace that. So a lot of good things are occurring, but we got to diversify our economy, and that's going to really depend on what we do in the healthcare space, Old Dominion, higher ed, and private sector.
So why is it important that we continue to invest in the Port of Virginia?
Well, it's the economic engine. I think 1 out of 10 jobs or 9 jobs are touched by that. And it's an economic engine, and it's amazing to see when I go from Suffolk over to to Norfolk to see the 2 tracks you know, with the double stack trains all the way back to the facility, and how much commerce comes out of the port. And we need to do more off-site, and we're working on mega sites right now. I think they've identified 8 to 10 mega sites in the Hampton Roads area. I think Frank Wagner might have a bill this year dealing with how you can start getting right away in anticipation of something occurring, because we need ready sites. In other words, when a company wants to come, can we be ready in the next handful of months to a year so they can be up and running?
Right. We have to make sure we stay ahead of Charleston, for example.
Absolutely.
New York.
Well, and Savannah, I mean, they've put hundreds of millions of dollars, and Charleston goes to 52 feet, as you know, within the next 2 or 3 years. But now that we'll have a dredge out there going to 55, we will be the deepest on the East Coast, and we'll be able to take, and the key is being first in and last out.
Mm-hmm. What impact, if any, has the shutdown so far had in the Hampton Roads area?
Well, you know, military was exempt. A lot of things that affect us were exempt, but you know, you will see some impact. We got some Coast Guard. You know, we got Coast Guard facilities. People aren't getting paid, and we need to make sure that we are ready to do what we can do. I feel strongly, we cannot backfill federal dollars with state dollars. Right. We can never begin that process.
Right.
If we do, then I think we've gone too far, and then that expectation would be that we would come in behind and supplant the federal government. We just can't do that.
Part of the governor's budget includes a raise for state employees and teachers as well. Again, that depends upon 1.2 versus the 900 million.
Well, we did raises. You know, they're getting raises.
Right.
And he was being all things to all people. Quite frankly, it was a political document more so than a public policy document, in my opinion. Because we're doing 3% beginning July 1st, and he put something on top of that. But that requires your school divisions to match it.
That's true.
And it's going to be very difficult for many. They were planning on the 3. What I've heard in my feedback from the ones that I've talked to, they'd rather have more flexibility like we did with lottery, or with doing something on a support cap for personnel.
Because the lottery doesn't require a match at the local level.
Correct. And so this is saying, if we do it, you've got to do more. And so we'll have that discussion. Employee bonus for state employees, but you know, we've done more in the last handful of years. I've been very proud of what we've done. Of course, you'd always like to be able to do more, but the real challenge is, you know, what will get us, will have the biggest meaningful impact, because we've got some strategic issues to deal with in corrections and social services, of high rate turnover in the neighborhood of 30–35%.
30 seconds left. I-81 is on the table, as it has been for some time.
Yes, I'm pleased to see that. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. Having been involved in some transportation deals in the past, I think it's overdue, and it's needed and necessary, because that's the main street for Virginia of commerce, going in and out of our, from Front Royal all the way down to Bristol.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Chris Jones. Good luck as chair of the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.